He walked into the Devil's Saloon with his last dollar and walked out with a little girl. The saloon in Despair's End was a splintered, shadow-drenched box stinking of stale desperation, raw greed, and slow decay. Jonah Thorne stood apart from the noise, a ghost at the edge of the lantern light. His gaze ignored the jeering card players and settled on the girl Rosalie. He watched her clear, empty glasses, her small frame trembling under the venomous watch of Corbin Cutter. Jonah's hand tightened on the single worn silver dollar in his pocket. It was all he had. In her frightened eyes he saw a ghost of his own, a face lost to the dust, a promise he failed to keep. That failure was a brand on his soul. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a lawman with a tin star. But as he watched Cutter sneer, a cold resolve settled in his gut. He was a man who was finally ready to belly up to the devil. Tonight a soul was on the table, and with $1 and a pass to bury, Jonah Thorne was about to play the most dangerous hand of his life. The air in Corbin Cutter's saloon was a thick, breathing thing woven from stale whiskey sweat and the ghosts of lost wages. An out-of-tune piano wept in the corner, its notes stumbling over the raw laughter of men who had forgotten the sun. This was Despair's End. It was a place where hope came to be buried, and Corbin Cutter was its undertaker. Jonah Thorne let the atmosphere settle over him, a familiar shroud. He stood by the door, a silhouette carved from shadow, his back to the dying light outside. He did not drink. He did not play. He watched. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, bypassed the gamblers and their desperate hands. They found the girl. She was a whisper in the chaos, no older than 12, moving through the haze like a moth with broken wings. Her name was Rosalie, he'd learned, and she darted between tables, collecting empty glasses with hands that were too small, too thin. Her movements were silent, practiced. She had learned the hard geometry of staying invisible. Corbin Cutter sat at the center of it all, a spider in his web. He was a man built of sharp angles and smug satisfaction, his waistcoat tight across a prosperous belly. He didn't miss a thing. Rosalie? His voice cut through the noise, sharp and cold as a winter wind. Every head turned. The girl flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders, and turned to face him. "Yes, Mr. Cutter." Her voice was a wisp of sound easily lost. Cutter held up a glass, tilting it in the lamplight. A greasy smudge marred its surface. "This," he announced to the room, his voice dripping with theatrical contempt, "is the mark of laziness. You think my patrons want a drink from your filth." A few men snickered. Rosalie's face, already pale, lost its remaining color. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll clean it again." "Oh, you'll do more than that." Cutter purred, leaning forward. His eyes, black and bottomless as a dead man's stare, pinned her in place. "You'll remember who you belong to. Your father's debt isn't getting any smaller, girl. Every broken glass, every lazy smudge, it all adds to the tally." The words were a branding iron against Jonah's soul. Belong to. He felt it then. The phantom weight of a small hand in his, a memory of faded blue ribbons and a gap-toothed smile, a life swallowed by the unforgiving prairie. He had been too late then. A lifetime of running, and the ghost was still right there, staring back at him from a dirty saloon glass. His hand went to his pocket fingers, closing around the cold, smooth surface of a single silver dollar. It was the last of his pay. A single coin against a mountain of debt, a fool's bet. Rosalie took the glass, her head bowed. "Yes, sir." She turned, and for a fleeting second her eyes met Jonah's. In their depths he saw not just fear, but a flicker of something else, a desperate banked ember of defiance that had not yet been extinguished. It was enough. Jonah pushed himself away from the wall. The worn leather of his gun belt creaked, the only sound he made. He walked not towards the bar, but towards the poker table where Cutter presided. Each step was deliberate, heavy with a choice that had just been made. The saloon's noise seemed to fade, the out-of-tune piano receding into a dull, distant ache. He stopped at the edge of the table, his shadow falling over the scattered cards. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He met Corbin Cutter's black-eyed gaze across the room. The music soured. The laughter died. A challenge had been issued without a single word spoken. A silence thick as mud settled over the poker table. The out-of-tune piano finally gave up its last note, hanging in the smoky air like a question. The men at the table moments ago, loud with drink and cheap boasts, now held their cards tight, their eyes shifting from the stone-faced stranger to the man who owned their town. Corbin Cutter was the first to break the quiet. He didn't look up, merely nudged a stack of chips with a manicured finger. A small, contemptuous smile played on his lips. "Lost your way, stranger. The bar is over there, unless you have the coin to sit with men." Jonah's gaze did not waver from Cutter's. It was a physical force, a weight. "I'm not thirsty," he said. His voice was gravel and dust, an unused thing. "And I'm not here for your coin." He opened his hand and placed the single silver dollar on the scarred wood. It shone with a lonely, defiant light against the dark table, an insult in its solitude. Cutter finally looked up. His eyes, small and dark, appraised Jonah from his worn-out boots to his determined jaw. He saw nothing of value. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. $1, boy. You can't even buy a decent rope with that in this town. And believe me, you look like you could use one." The men at the table forced a laugh, but their eyes were wary. This was different. This wasn't a game anymore. "That dollar isn't the buy-in," Jonah said, his voice flat, cutting through their noise. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the bar where Rosalie stood frozen, clutching a dirty rag. "I'm here to play for her." The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. The saloon went utterly still. Even the bartender stopped his endless polishing. Cutter's smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief that quickly hardened into cruel amusement. "For the girl." He leaned back, spreading his arms wide, a gesture that encompassed the whole rotten room. "Son, everything in this saloon is mine. The whiskey, the cards, the men's losses." His gaze slid to Rosalie, and his voice dropped, becoming possessive and slick. "And her. She is an asset, collateral on a debt her foolish father left behind. She is worth a hell of a lot more than one pathetic dollar." "I have more," Jonah said. The words were quiet, but they held the room captive. He laid his hands flat on the table, a gesture of complete vulnerability or complete confidence. "My horse. A strong bay, no frills, but he'll outrun anything in this territory. My saddle worn but true. And this." He slowly unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the edge of the table. The Colt Peacemaker, its handle smoothed by time and trouble, seemed to absorb the dim light. It was more than a weapon. It was a man's last line of defense, his history and his future. "All of it," Jonah finished. "My horse, my gear, my gun. Everything I have, for her freedom." Corbin Cutter stared at the gun, then at Jonah's unblinking eyes. The amusement returned, magnified, twisted into something predatory. This was better than money. Money was fleeting. Owning a man, breaking him down to nothing that was a kind of wealth that lasted. "A tempting offer," Cutter mused, tapping a finger on his chin. "But that's a messy wager. Let's simplify. I like simple things." He leaned forward, his voice a conspirator's whisper that reached every corner of the silent room. "One hand of poker, just you and me. Winner take all." He let the words hang, savoring them. "If you win," he continued, pointing a finger at Jonah, "the girl is free. I'll burn her father's ledger myself. She can walk out that door and never look back." He smiled, then a crack in a tombstone. "But if I win, your horse, your saddle, your peacemaker, they become mine. And you," his voice dropped to ice, "you will work for me for 1 year. No pay, my property. You'll sweep this floor muck out the stables and do anything I ask. You will belong to me just like she does." Jonah felt the ghost of his past whisper in his ear. A chance to pay. A chance to fix it. He looked past Cutter to the girl by the bar. Her eyes were wide, a universe of terror, and a fragile, impossible hope swirling within them. He had come to this town with nothing but a horse and a memory. He might leave with less. He met Cutter's gaze. Deal the cards. The men at the table scrambled back as if the wood itself had become electrified. Chairs scraped against the floorboards, their occupants melting into the gallery of shadows that ringed the light. The world shrank to a circle of yellow lamplight, a scarred wooden table, and 2 men separated by a gulf of silence. In that circle lay all of Jonah's worldly possessions: a worn saddle, a good horse waiting outside, and a colt peacemaker that had spoken for him more times than he cared to remember. Corbin Cutter smiled, savoring the theater of it all. "Barkeep," he called without taking his eyes off Jonah. "A fresh deck, sealed. Let no man say I am not a fair and sporting man." The bartender, a man with fear-haunted eyes, produced a new pack of cards. Cutter broke the seal with a flourish of his thumb, the paper tearing with a crisp, final sound. He shuffled the cards himself, his movements slick and practiced. The ripple of the deck was the only sound in the room, a dry, whispering rattle like a snake coiling in the dust. He did not offer the cut to Jonah. It was not a game between equals. He began to deal. 5 cards slid across the felt one for Jonah, one for him. The motion was hypnotic. Each card that landed before Jonah felt less like paper and more like a stone being laid upon a grave. His grave. He did not touch them. He waited until the 5th card settled. Across the table, Cutter picked up his hand with the casual air of a man who knew the outcome before the game had even begun. He fanned them out, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. Jonah finally reached for his own. The cards were cool and stiff foreign against his calloused skin. He lifted them slowly, shielding them from view, and his heart sank. It was a hand of ghosts and nothing more. A pair of 3s, a 10, a jack, a king. A gathering of strangers that promised nothing. It was a hand born of bad luck and worse timing. A fool's hand. He could feel the cold breath of his past on his neck, whispering of failure. This is how you lose. This is how you fail her, too. He kept his face a mask of stone, a landscape carved by wind and rain and regret. He let none of it show. "The draw, stranger," Cutter prompted, his voice oozing confidence. "Fortune favors the bold. How many cards for the man betting his own hide?" With a flick of his wrist, Cutter slid 1 card from his hand and tossed it face down onto the table. "Dealer, give me one." He held 4 good cards. He was strong. All eyes turned to Jonah. This was the moment, the tell. A man's desperation or his confidence was laid bare by the cards he threw away. To discard 2 would signal a strong base. To discard 3 was to admit you held nothing but a prayer. Jonah's gaze drifted past Cutter, finding Rosalie in the shadows by the bar. She was watching him, her small hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She was not looking at the cards. She was looking at him. In her eyes, he saw the terrifying, fragile light of trust. She believed in him, a stranger. He would not let that light go out. He made his choice. With a steady hand, he separated 3 cards from his hand, the 10, the jack, the king, and placed them face down on the table. A collective, quiet gasp went through the room. 3 cards. He was chasing a phantom. Cutter's grin widened into a predator's smile. He had him. The fool was chasing a third 3. The odds were impossibly long. 3 cards. Cutter chuckled, shaking his head. The man has grit, I'll give him that. Or perhaps he's just in a hurry to learn how to use a broom. Dealer, give the man his 3. The dealer slid the first card across the table. It was a spade, black as a grave. The second, a heart, red as blood. The third and final card followed, stopping just before Jonah's waiting hand. Time seemed to bend and warp. Jonah could hear the frantic drumming of his own heart, a desperate rhythm against the suffocating silence. He reached down his fingers, brushing against the edges of the 3 new cards, 3 slivers of fate that would decide everything. He slid them into his hand, merging them with the 2 lonely 3s he had kept. He held his breath and looked. The world fell away. The saloon, the smoke, the staring eyes, all of it vanished. There was only the 5 cards in his hand. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't the hand a man would bet his freedom on. It was a bust, a nothing, a broken prayer. And yet, through the despair, a razor-thin sliver of impossible light. A dangerous suicidal path had just opened before him. A path that would require more than luck. It would require an act of faith so profound it bordered on madness. The 5 cards in Jonah's hand felt like a death sentence. A pair of 3s stared back at him, mocking him with their inadequacy. The other 3 cards were orphans, a chaotic jumble of suits and numbers that offered no help, no hope, no path forward. A king, a jack, a 10, a hand full of almosts. It was a bust, a shattered prayer. The kind of hand that gets a man laughed out of a game before he's sent to work in the stables for the rest of his miserable life. The cold dread that washed over him was an old friend. It was the same cold that had swept over him on the plains all those years ago, the silence after the thunder, the stillness after the loss. The ghost of his past rose up, its voice a hollow wind in his ears. You see, you are a man born for failure. You couldn't save her then, and you can't save this one now. You are nothing. For a devastating second he believed it. His shoulders slumped, the muscles in his jaw going slack. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room, the suffocating pity, the smug certainty from across the table. He could feel the small, fragile light of Rosalie's trust beginning to flicker out behind him. And that was the one thing he would not allow. He would not let that light die. Something shifted deep within him. The grief, the failure, the cold dread, he took it all and banked it, burying it deep beneath a layer of ice so thick no man could see through it. He was not just a man with a bad hand anymore. He had to become a lie. He had to become a fortress of absolute, unshakable conviction. He was no longer playing the cards in his hand. He was playing the man across the table. Slowly, deliberately, Jonah gathered the 5 cards. He squared them up, his calloused fingers showing no tremor. He did not look at them again. He looked only at Corbin Cutter. He let a profound calm settle on his features, the calm of a man who held lightning in his hands and was merely deciding when to let it strike. Cutter, ever the showman, began the final act. He leaned forward, his voice a slick, condescending purr. Well now, stranger, the moment of truth. My bet to you. He casually pushed a tall stack of chips into the center of the table, a sum that could buy a man a small ranch. A hefty sum, I think. A bet that says my hand is strong and my nerve is stronger. What say you? Did your 3 little cards bring you a miracle? The room waited for Jonah to fold. It was the only logical move. He had nothing left to bet. His life's possessions were already in the pot. All he had left to lose was his freedom. Jonah did not look at the chips. He did not look at his cards. He held Cutter's gaze. I'll see your bet, he said, his voice level. A murmur went through the crowd. He was calling with what Jonah wasn't finished. And I'll raise you. The murmur died, strangled by disbelief. Corbin Cutter's smug expression faltered for the first time, a hairline crack in his composure. "Raise me," he scoffed, his voice tight. "With what stranger? The dust on your boots, the air in your lungs." Jonah's face remained impassive. "With another year." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air from the room. "Another year of my life." Jonah clarified, his voice soft, but caring to every corner. "You said 1 year if I lose. I'll raise you to 2. 2 years of my labor. 2 years of being your property. That's my raise." It was a bet of pure madness. A move of such catastrophic desperation that it looped all the way around to look like supreme confidence. No man would make such a wager on a bluff. No man would bet 2 years of his own life on a prayer. The logic was so twisted, so insane, that it began to sow the first seed of doubt in Corbin Cutter's mind. Cutter stared, his mouth slightly agape. He was a man who understood greed, threats, and power. He did not understand this. He did not understand a man who valued his own freedom so little. "What in God's name are you holding?" Cutter whispered the question more to himself than to Jonah. He tried to recover, to regain control. 4 of a kind, is that it? You pulled a miracle from the deck, did you, stranger? Jonah offered nothing. He simply sat there, a stone wall of patience, letting Cutter's own paranoia do the work. The more Cutter talked, the more he revealed his own growing uncertainty. The stranger wasn't playing the game right. He wasn't supposed to be this calm. He wasn't supposed to bet with things that had no monetary value, but were in fact priceless. "It's your bet, Mr. Cutter," Jonah said quietly, turning the pressure back with the force of a landslide. "I've made my raise. Now you must decide. Are you going to call a man who is betting 2 years of his life against your stack of chips? Or are you going to fold?" He let his gaze drift for a half-second to the peacemaker resting on the table. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement. "This is what I thought my life was worth before I saw my cards. And what I'm holding now is worth far more." The seed of doubt in Cutter's mind began to sprout its thorny vines, wrapping around his certainty. He looked at Jonah's unreadable face. He looked at the impossible bet. He looked at his own hand, 3 aces. A powerful hand, a winning hand against almost anything. But was it a winner against a miracle? Was it a winner against a madman? To call and lose now would not just be a financial loss. It would be an utter humiliation, a story told in every saloon from here to the territories the day Corbin Cutter was bluffed out of his own game by a broke stranger. To fold was to admit that the stranger's nerve was better than his cards. Cutter's manicured hand trembled as it hovered between his chips and his cards. The sweat on his brow glistened in the lamplight. The entire room, the entire town, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. He looked from the impassive stranger to his own 3 aces, from the madman's bet to the girl standing in the shadows. The devil had been dealt his hand. Now he had to make a choice. The silence in the saloon was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a living entity, a predator coiled in the center of the room, and its heart was the space between 2 men at a poker table. Jonah Thorne was a statue of impossible calm, his entire being focused on a single task, holding the weight of his monumental lie. He watched Corbin Cutter, and in the flickering lamplight he saw the man begin to unravel. It started in the eyes. Cutter's gaze, once so sharp and mocking, now darted between Jonah's impassive face and the 5 cards laid out before him. The black pupils were dilated, not with confidence, but with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. He was no longer playing the game. He was fighting the phantom hand he had built in his own mind. He imagined 4 kings, a straight flush, a full house. He populated Jonah's hand with monsters born of his own rising fear. A bead of sweat traced a path from his temple down his fleshy cheek, a single glistening tear of doubt. Jonah did not blink. He did not breathe. He was a mountain, and the storm of Cutter's panic was breaking against him. He could feel the lie straining a thread stretched to its absolute limit. One wrong move, one flicker of his own terror, and it would all snap, plunging him into a servitude worse than death. The ghost of his past screamed at him to run to Fold, to accept his fate, but the image of Rosalie's face, a small pale moon in the darkness, was his anchor. He held fast. Cutter's resolve finally crumbled. The fear of humiliation had become greater than the pleasure of victory. He could not call. He could not risk being exposed as a fool who had been bluffed by a man with nothing. His jaw clenched, the muscles working furiously. With a soft, defeated hiss of air, he surrendered. His hand, which had been hovering in torment, moved with agonizing slowness towards his cards on the table. He was going to fold. A wave of dizzying relief threatened to pull Jonah under. He had done it. The impossible bluff had held. He had won. But pride is a bitter and tenacious thing. Just as his fingers were about to touch his cards and push them into the muck, Cutter couldn't resist one last spiteful act. He lifted his head, his face a mask of pure hatred, to glare at the man who had undone him. It was a fatal moment of distraction. From the edge of the light there was a sudden sharp cry. Crash! The sound was an explosion in the dead-still room. A tray of glasses held by Rosalie had slipped from her grasp and shattered on the floorboards, a cascade of broken crystal and spilled whiskey. Every man in the room jumped at the sound. Cutter, his nerves already frayed to the breaking point, flinched violently. His hand, which was poised over his cards, jerked back in shock. The movement was small, reflexive, but it was enough. A single card, which had been cleverly palmed beneath his wrist, hidden by the angle of his hand, slid out from its hiding place. It skittered across the felt spinning once before landing face up beside his other cards. It was the ace of spades. The fourth ace. The saloon, which had been silent, became something else entirely. It became a vacuum. The air was gone. Time itself stopped. Jonah saw it all in a single crystalline moment of clarity. He saw the fourth ace lying there, a stark monument to Cutter's deceit. He saw the look of pure, primal panic that washed over Cutter's face as he stared at the exposed card, his mouth opening in a silent, horrified gasp. And he saw Rosalie on her knees amidst the broken glass, her head bowed as if in shame. But Jonah saw the truth. It was not an accident. It was a sacrifice. It was the bravest act he had ever witnessed. She hadn't just saved him from a bad hand. She had armed him with the truth. The spell was broken. A low murmur rippled through the crowd of onlookers, a dangerous growling sound. The men were not gamblers anymore. They were a jury. They had all seen it. The king of despair's end was nothing but a common cheat. His empire of fear, built on a myth of ruthless power, had just been brought down by a 12-year-old girl and a pile of broken glass. Cutter tried to recover, to bluster his way out. Clumsy, clumsy little brat! He stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Rosalie. Look what you— His voice died in his throat. It was useless. He was exposed. Naked. Jonah did not raise his voice. He did not point to the fourth ace. He did not need to. His victory was now absolute, and he would deliver it with quiet, devastating mercy. He looked at the broken man across from him and for the first time felt a sliver of something akin to pity. It's still your bet, Mr. Cutter. Jonah said, his voice soft, almost gentle. The words cut deeper than any accusation. He was giving the man a chance to retreat and exit that would save him from the rope he so richly deserved, but would cost him everything else. Do you want to call my raise? The question was absurd. To call now would be to admit his cheating hand to the world. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. Corbin Cutter stared at Jonah, his face a ruin of sweat and collapsed pride. He looked at the fourth ace, then at the impassive faces of the men watching him, their respect for him bleeding away onto the sawdust-covered floor. He looked at his 3 other aces, now a monument to his own greed. With a final shuddering breath, he closed his eyes. He used the back of his trembling hand to push his cards forward face down into the center of the table. He had folded. Jonah Thorne did not reach for the mountain of chips. He did not touch his gun or his silver dollar. He simply took a long, slow breath, the first clean breath he'd taken in a decade. His gaze moved across the room past the wreckage of a broken tyrant and found Rosalie. She was looking up now, her face streaked with dust, but her eyes were shining with a fierce, brilliant light. In that silent shared glance, a debt was not just paid. A soul was not just freed. A promise broken long ago on a lonely prairie was finally kept. The saloon was a tomb. The men who lined its walls were silent witnesses, their faces carved from the shadows, their eyes fixed on the man who had just dethroned their king. Corbin Cutter remained slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out effigy of power, the foul smoke of his own deceit choking the air around him. The 4th ace still lay on the table, a black spade like a final damning period on the story of his reign. Jonah Thorne moved as if waking from a long and terrible dream. He did not look at the chips, a small mountain of fool's gold he had never intended to claim. He walked around the table, his boots making no sound on the sawdust-covered floor. He went first to his gun belt, lifting the heavy leather and buckling it around his waist. The familiar weight of the peacemaker settling on his hip was a comfort, a quiet reclamation of himself. He reached down and plucked a single worn silver dollar from the table, closing his fist around it. It felt warmer now. Then he approached Corbin Cutter. He did not need to speak. He simply stood before the broken man, his shadow falling over him, and waited. Cutter, without looking up, used a trembling hand to push a thick, leather-bound ledger across the table. His account book. A Bible of misery and debt. Jonah took it. He flipped through the brittle yellowed pages, the names of broken men and desperate families blurring before his eyes, until he found the one he was looking for. Rosalie. Debt inherited from the late Thomas Miller. He did not tear the page. That was too small a gesture for so large a crime. He walked over to Rosalie, who was still kneeling amidst the glittering shards of broken glass. He knelt before her, the ledger in his hand. "It's time to go," he said softly, and he helped her to her feet. He led her back to the center of the room, to the poker table that had been their battlefield. With the whole room watching, he ripped the page cleanly from the ledger's binding. He walked to the nearest lantern, its flames sputtering weakly. He opened the hot glass casing, the metal searing his fingertips, and touched the corner of the page to the fire. The paper curled, turning black at the edges before catching flame. The ink of the names, the numbers, the years of indentured servitude all began to dissolve into a bright, hungry orange light. He held it aloft, a torch burning away a lifetime of injustice. When it was nearly gone, he dropped the last flaming scrap to the floor and crushed the glowing ashes into dust beneath the heel of his boot. It was finished. He turned to Rosalie, whose eyes were wide and luminous in the firelight. "What now?" she whispered, her voice fragile. "Now," Jonah said, his own voice, thick with an emotion he couldn't name, "we leave this place behind." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and guided her towards the swinging doors. The crowd of men parted for them, a silent human sea. No one spoke. No one dared to meet Cutter's ruined gaze. As they stepped out into the pre-dawn chill, leaving the stench of stale whiskey and shattered pride behind them, the cool, clean air felt like a benediction. The sky was beginning to bleed with the first pale colors of morning as Jonah led his horse from the livery. Despair's End was a town of ghosts in the morning mist, its false fronts and broken fences looking even more pitiful in the gentle light. He lifted Rosalie onto the saddle, her small frame barely making a dent before swinging up behind her. She was light as a bird, and she trembled slightly from the cold or from the aftershock of the night. He did not urge the horse into a gallop. They moved at a slow, deliberate walk, leaving the town without a backward glance. The weight that had lived in Jonah's chest for so long, a cold, hard stone of grief, had not vanished. But it felt different now. Lighter, worn smooth by a single act of redemption. The ghost of the girl he had lost was still with him, but her voice was no longer a scream of failure. It was a quiet whisper of peace. As the sun finally broke over the horizon, painting the vast open plains in hues of rose and gold, Rosalie leaned back slightly against him. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small against the immense landscape. Jonah looked ahead at the endless stretch of land, at the promise of a world beyond the dust and decay of the town behind them. "Somewhere green." He said the words, feeling new in his mouth. Somewhere a person can put down roots and not be afraid of the storm. They rode in silence for a long time, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the sigh of the morning wind. Then she spoke again, her question so quiet he almost missed it. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Bet everything. For me." Jonah thought of the long, lonely years, of the face he could never forget, of the promise he had made to a ghost. He thought of the impossible hand, the soul-crushing bluff, and the small brave girl who had saved him in the end. He looked down at the top of her head, her hair catching the first rays of the sun. "Yes," he said, and his voice was clear and true for the first time in a lifetime. "I did." And together, two survivors, two ghosts, two souls who had found each other in a place where all hope was meant to die, rode on into the rising sun. What a powerful testament that sometimes the greatest victories in the West weren't won with a gun, but with a single, impossible act of courage. As Jonah and Rosalie ride into that new dawn, you have to wonder, what does the future truly hold for two souls who found hope in a place called Despair's End? If their story of redemption touched your heart, show your support by hitting that like button. And we want to hear from you in the comments below. What was the moment that gripped you the most? Was it the impossible bluff or the final shattering of glass? But the frontier never rests, and another story of courage against all odds is waiting to be told. Next week, we travel to a desperate mining town choking on sickness and secrets. We'll meet a runaway nurse, the town's only hope, who must save its people while a relentless bounty hunter closes in, sent by the powerful man she fled. You won't want to miss this tale of impossible choices. Make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll be right here with us when the next story unfolds.